He pushed the divorce papers toward me alongside a glass of red wine that reeked of bitter almonds and cold metal. Julian's smile was a jagged blade of triumph. "Sign it," he sneered, leaning into the dim light. "You are not worth a single cent of the Thorne legacy." He had no clue that the skyscraper we stood in and his entire empire actually belonged to me for 5 years. "My name is Elena Vance. I am 32 years old, and for the last 5 years, I have played the role of the perfect quiet wife with the precision of a master clockmaker. To the world and to the man I married. I am a senior risk analyst at Vanguard Crest. It is a prestigious enough title, but in reality, it is a ghost identity. A carefully constructed shell designed to hide the fact that I am the sole architect of a financial empire that could swallow the city whole. I have spent my life calculating probabilities and mitigating threats, yet I failed to see the most lethal risk growing right beside me in my own bed. Our 5th anniversary dinner was set against the backdrop of our cold, minimalist dining room. Julian Thorne arrived home later than usual, but he carried a trophy. It was a bottle of vintage red wine from 1990, the kind of rare find he usually kept locked away for his business associates or his own vanity. He never shared the good stuff with me, not unless he had a reason. To us. "Elena," he said, his voice smooth like velvet over gravel. He poured the deep crimson liquid into 2 crystal flutes, to 5 years of marriage and to the massive expansion of the Zenith Group. Everything is about to change. As he slid the glass toward me, my nostrils flared. It was a reflexive twitch of a woman trained to notice the smallest deviation in a pattern. Beneath the heavy, oaky scent of the grapes, there was a faint, sickly sweet trail of bitter almonds. My blood turned to ice. In the world of high-stakes chemistry and low-stakes murders, that smell was unmistakable. It was cyanide. Julian's phone buzzed on the mahogany table. He glanced at it, a smirk playing on his lips, and stepped away to the floor-to-ceiling windows to take the call. I didn't waste a second. I stood up and moved toward the large potted monstera in the corner of the room. I tipped my glass, watching the poisoned vintage disappear into the dark soil. By the time Julian turned back, I was sitting perfectly still, the empty glass clutched in my trembling hands. I watched the plant out of the corner of my eye. Within 3 minutes, the vibrant green leaves began to curl. By 5 minutes, they were shriveling into a blackened, necrotic mess. Julian walked back to the table, his eyes searching mine with a terrifying intensity. "Drink up, sweetheart. Every last drop. I want us to be on the same page tonight, truly, together." I forced a smile, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I already did. "Julian, it was heavy. I think I need a moment. My head is spinning." I made a show of stumbling, pressing a hand to my forehead as I hurried toward the master bathroom. I locked the door and collapsed against the cold marble tile. My breath came in ragged gasps. I reached into the hidden pocket of my silk robe and pulled out a small plastic stick. I had taken the test an hour before he came home, but had been too terrified to look at the result. I looked now. 2 distinct, unwavering pink lines stared back at me. I was pregnant. I was carrying the child of a man who had just tried to serve me a death sentence in a wine glass. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Julian's sudden urgency to divorce me, his strange behavior over the last month. It wasn't about a midlife crisis or business stress. He was clearing the board. He needed me gone before I became a permanent complication. At exactly 11 o'clock, the heavy thud of the front door echoed through the house. I stayed in the dark, creeping out of the bathroom and moving to the shadows of the upstairs gallery. Below, in the foyer, stood Lydia. She was Julian's private secretary, a woman who usually wore a mask of professional boredom. Tonight, she looked like she owned the place. She draped her designer coat over our armchair and walked straight into Julian's arms. Is she finally out of the way? Lydia asked, her voice echoing up the stairwell. I moved closer to the railing, my knuckles white as I gripped the wood. Julian's response was low, but in the silence of the house, it sounded like a thunderclap. She is resting, Julian whispered, and I could hear the cruel tilt of his smile. The wine will take care of the rest. Do not be impatient, Lydia. Once she disappears, truly disappears, the position of the Lady of the Zenith Group will be yours. Everything I have built, everything she thinks she owns, it will all be ours. I stood there in the suffocating darkness, one hand protectively covering my stomach. My marriage was not just a lie, it was a graveyard. Julian Thorne thought he was playing a game of checkers with a woman he had already defeated. He had no idea that he was standing on a trap door, and I was the one with my hand on the lever. This was no longer a home. It was a battlefield, and I was the only one who knew the war had already begun. The morning light was a cruel, clinical white as it cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the breakfast nook. I sat there, nursing a cup of black coffee I had made myself, my eyes fixed on the shriveled monstera plant in the corner. I had survived the night, but the air in this house had become toxic. The front door didn't just open, it slammed against the wall. Victoria Thorne marched in without the courtesy of a knock, her heels clicking against the marble like the rhythmic strike of a soldier's boot. Behind her, Julian followed, his face a mask of practiced indifference. Without a word, Victoria reached into her designer handbag and flicked a thick envelope across the table. Photos spilled out, scattering like dry leaves. They were high-resolution shots of me meeting a man in a secluded corner of a downtown cafe 2 days ago. The man was Marcus, the lead counsel for the Vance estate. But to anyone else, he looked like a wealthy, handsome stranger. I knew the blood in your veins was thin, but I didn't think it was this cheap, Victoria hissed, her voice dripping with a lifetime of inherited arrogance. A girl like you, an orphan with no name and no background, should have spent every day on her knees thanking God for the Thorne name. Instead, you spend our money on your little playthings. I looked at the photos, then up at her. He is a friend. Victoria. Nothing more. Do not lie to me, she shrieked, slamming her palm onto the table. You have been a parasite on this family for 5 years. You've lived in our houses, worn our jewels, and breathed our air. It ends today. Julian stepped forward, sliding a thick stack of legal documents over the photos. His voice was cold, devoid of the murderous intent from the night before, replaced now by a sharp, business-like cruelty. The terms are non-negotiable. Elena, Julian said, infidelity voided the prenuptial agreement. You leave with nothing. No alimony, no settlement, and you take nothing from this house that you didn't bring with you in that pathetic cardboard suitcase 5 years ago. I picked up the pen, my fingers steady despite the fire roaring in my chest. I flipped to the last page. My eyes caught the clause tucked away in the fine print, an absolute waiver of parental rights. They knew, or they suspected. You want me to sign away a child. If there ever were one, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Julian leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Especially then. A Thorne child will not be raised by a disgraced woman like you. Sign it, and you can walk out of here before I call the police to report the jewelry you've undoubtedly stolen. From the doorway, Bianca, Julian's younger sister, leaned against the frame. She let out a sharp, jagged laugh as she looked down at my feet. Look at those shoes, scuffed heels and faux leather. You really were a failed gold digger, weren't you? You couldn't even manage to look the part while you were cheating on my brother. I looked at them, the triad of Thorne arrogance. They saw a broken woman. They saw a victim. They had no idea that I was the one who had quietly approved the 40% equity stake their company desperately needed to stay afloat last quarter. I was the hand that fed them, and they were trying to bite it off. I signed the papers. The ink was black and final. "I'm leaving," I said, standing up. I reached for the thin gold chain around my neck. It held a small, weathered locket, the only thing I had left of my mother. "Where do you think you're going with that?" Victoria barked. She lunged forward, her hand clamping around my wrist with surprising strength. She ripped the chain from my neck. "This is Thorne property now. Everything in this house was paid for by our blood." "That was my mother's," I said, my voice trembling with a sudden, sharp pain. "Please, Victoria." The slap was so hard it sent a dull ring through my ears. I felt the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. "You have no mother. You have no family." Victoria spat. "You are a thief, and thieves do not keep trophies. Get out. Now." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply turned and walked toward the door. As I stepped onto the porch, the sky broke open. A cold, gray rain began to pour, soaking through my thin coat within seconds. I walked to the end of the driveway, past the iron gates that had felt like a prison for half a decade. Once I reached the corner of the street, I pulled a burner phone from my pocket. My voice was like a blade of ice. "It is me. Execute Protocol Omega. Cancel every Thorne credit line. Immediately. I want them to feel the floor drop out from under them before the sun sets today." A sleek, black limousine with tinted windows pulled up silently beside the curb. The door opened, and a man in a crisp suit stepped out, holding a large umbrella over my head. "Welcome back, Madam President," he said softly. I stepped into the warm, leather-scented interior of the car, leaving the rain and the Thorne name behind me in the gutter. The lobby of Ethelgard Vance Holdings was a cathedral of glass and steel, a monument to a legacy that the Thorne family could only dream of touching. As I walked through the sliding doors, the rain-soaked woman who had been humiliated in a suburban driveway vanished. In her place stood the ghost who ran their world. The security team straightened their backs instantly, and the head receptionist's eyes widened in recognition. I took the private elevator straight to the 60th floor, the ascent silent and rapid, mirrors reflecting a woman whose eyes had turned into chips of flint. "Call an emergency board meeting," I told my chief of staff the moment the doors opened. "I want every head of department in the conference room in 10 minutes. No excuses and no delays." I sat at the head of the mahogany table, my damp coat replaced by a tailored blazer that cost more than Julian's annual car lease. I looked at the faces of the most powerful analysts in the country, men and women who moved markets with a whisper. "We are reviewing our position in the Zenith Group," I began, my voice steady and devoid of warmth. "Give me the real numbers, not the ones they put in their glossy brochures." Marcus, my lead counsel and the man Victoria Thorne had mistaken for a lover, slid a tablet across the table. "It is far worse than the public knows. Madam President, Julian Thorne has been funneling millions of dollars, roughly $5 million in the last year alone, into a network of shell companies. We tracked the flow. It went directly to luxury condos in the city and several offshore accounts under the name of Lydia Sterling." I felt a cold surge of satisfaction. The betrayal was documented in black and white. "And his personal liquidity. He is drowning," Marcus replied, his mouth thinning into a hard line. "To maintain the illusion of a billionaire lifestyle while Zenith's profit margins shrank, he took high-interest loans from underground lenders. We are talking about $12 million in shadow debt. If they do not get paid by the end of the month, well, let us just say those people do not use lawyers to collect." I turned to my head of security, a man who specialized in the shadows Julian thought he was so clever at navigating. "The wine bottle. Did your team find the source?" He nodded grimly. "Our lab confirmed the residue, trace amounts of cyanide. The vintage was sourced through a private broker 3 weeks ago. We have the digital trail. It points directly to a burner phone used by Julian's right-hand man, Brody. He was not just trying to divorce you, Elena. He was trying to erase you. A heavy silence fell over the room. They expected me to pull the plug right then, to crush Zenith under the weight of a 40% equity sell-off that would trigger a total market collapse. It would have been easy. It would have been quick. No, I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. If we kill the company now, he just declares bankruptcy and hides behind legal shields. I want him to watch everything he loves burn slowly. I want him to scramble. We are going to play a game of cat and mouse. I leaned forward, the light from the windows casting long shadows across the table. Appoint a supreme auditor to oversee Zenith's restructuring. Use the pseudonym Avery Cross. Inform the board at Zenith that if they do not cooperate with her every whim, Ethelgard pulls all funding and calls in every debt immediately. I will be handling the inspection myself. Within hours, the financial wires were buzzing with frantic energy. Rumors of a mysterious finance queen from Ethelgard moving to seize control of Zenith began to circulate like wildfire through the city's elite. I knew Julian would be staring at his monitors right now, sweat beads forming on his brow, wondering who was coming for his throat. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. Below, the city was a grid of tiny lights, and somewhere out there, the Thorne mansion was a crumbling fortress built on lies. I placed my other hand over my stomach, feeling the secret life growing inside me. He tried to take you away before you even had a name, I whispered to the empty room, my breath hitching for only a second. He thought we were nothing, just obstacles to be removed. But he has no idea who he is dealing with. My darling. I will make them pay for every single one of our tears. The pain in my chest from Victoria's slap was gone, replaced by a crystalline, diamond-hard focus. I walked back to my desk and picked up a heavy, cream-colored card. It was an invitation to the annual Ethelgard charity auction, the most exclusive event of the season. I grabbed a fountain pen and signed it at the bottom with a flourish, Chairman of Ethelgard. Have this delivered to Julian Thorne's office by private courier. I instructed my assistant. Make sure he receives it personally. I want him to feel a flicker of hope before I take the entire world away from him. The rain lashed against the windows of my temporary headquarters, a high-security suite that Julian could never penetrate. I sat across from Elias, a man whose face was a map of cold shadows and forgotten wars. I had hired him not just for his skills as a former intelligence officer, but for his absolute discretion. He placed a leather folder on my desk, the contents a grim testament to the depths of human depravity. Lydia Sterling spent 3 hours in the back room of an unlicensed clinic in the industrial district 2 nights ago. Elias said, his voice a gravelly monotone. She did not go there for a checkup. She was picking up a cocktail of restricted pharmaceuticals, drugs designed to terminate a pregnancy without leaving a trace in a standard toxicology screen. It is a calculated, lethal dose. My hand went instinctively to my stomach, protectively covering the life Julian wanted to snuff out. And Julian, did he order this? The payment was authorized through a shell company he uses for his private security. Elias replied, sliding a financial ledger toward me. He is not just looking for a clean break. Elena, he found out about the secondary trust fund tied to your family name, the one that activates only if there is a direct heir. If you have that child, he loses access to a fund worth nearly $200 million. He wants that money, and he wants you gone to get it. To him, you are just a line of credit that needs to be closed. The nausea that hit me had nothing to do with my pregnancy. Julian did not just want to divorce me, he was planning a double murder. I needed more than just a report. I needed the doctor who was willing to sell his soul. I tracked down Dr. Eris, Lydia's personal physician, to a dimly lit private club downtown. I met him in a corner booth, the shadows hiding the cold fury in my eyes. I have the records of your illegal prescriptions and the kickbacks you took from the Thorne accounts, I said, my voice like a serrated blade. You have two choices. Doctor, you can spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, or you can give me the recordings of your private consultations with Julian Thorne. The man's face turned the color of ash, his hands shaking as he reached for his drink. I do not know what you are talking about. Patient confidentiality is strictly— Do not talk to me about ethics, I interrupted, leaning into the light so he could see the lack of mercy in my expression. I will strip you of your medical license and your freedom before the sun comes up. Give me the files. 10 minutes later, I was back in my car, staring at a digital audio file. I pressed play. Julian's voice filled the cabin, sounding bored and clinical, as if he were discussing a bad stock option. Avery is too smart. She will realize if I use direct violence. She has that analyst's brain. She is always looking for patterns and risks. We have to be subtle. It has to look like a tragic accident, a medical complication during her pregnancy that no one can blame on us. Do you understand? I need it to be final. I shut the recording off, my body shaking with a violent tremor. Elena, he was using my real name. He had known who I was all along, not just the risk analyst, but the woman holding the Thorne's debt, and he had still planned to kill our child. The man I had shared a bed with for 5 years was a monster wearing a tailored suit. A chill settled in my bones that no heater could thaw. It is time to start the haunting, I whispered to the empty car. I began with a single text message sent from an encrypted, untraceable server to Julian's private phone at midnight. How was the vintage wine? Julian. I found the almond scent quite lingering and quite familiar. I followed it with another message an hour later. The monstera plant in the dining room died today. It was such a beautiful shade of green before it turned black and withered just like your soul. By the next morning, my surveillance team reported that Julian was a walking corpse. He was pacing his office, screaming at his staff, and accusing everyone in the building of being a mole. He had Brody, his right-hand man and fixer, scouring the city for the source of the messages. Find them. Brody, Julian's voice crackled through the bug I had planted in his office. I do not care if you have to burn this city to the ground. Find out who is doing this. Now, is it her? Is she alive? I smiled as I watched the grain of his sanity begin to fray. I decided to give him exactly what he wanted to target. I had Elias leak a fake location to one of Julian's paid informants. It was a lead that suggested the person harassing him was hiding out in an abandoned textile warehouse on the northern edge of the city. He is taking the bait, Elias reported 2 hours later. Julian and Brody are heading there now. They are armed and they look desperate. Good, I said, standing up and looking out at the city skyline from the 60th floor. Let him go to that warehouse. Let him stand in the dust in the dark, looking for a ghost. I want him to know what it feels like to wait for a blow that you cannot see coming. The real war hasn't even begun. The dust in the warehouse was thick enough to choke a man, but the rage radiating from Julian Thorne was more suffocating. He kicked a rusted metal bucket across the concrete floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the hollow space. He found no one, no blackmailer, no ghost. There was only a solitary, floor-length mirror standing in the center of the bay, catching the moonlight. Written across the glass in a jagged, violent stroke of crimson lipstick were 6 words. A killer always leaves a trace. Julian stared at his own reflection, his face pale and eyes wild with paranoia. Beside him, Lydia stepped back, her heels nervously clicking. She had been hounding him for 3 days about the deed to the $900,000 penthouse he had promised her. Julian, you are scaring me, Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. Is this about the money you said once the divorce was final? I would have everything. Julian turned on her, his hands balled into fists. The money. Or is it because you've been talking? Lydia. Who else knew about the wine? Who else knew about the dosage? You wanted that condo so badly. Did you decide to sell me out to get it? I would never. I love you, Julian. Please, she stammered, reaching for his arm. He shook her off with a snarl. I'm cutting your allowance. Effective immediately. No condo. No shopping. Until I find out who is leaking my life to the streets. You don't get a single cent. I sat in the back of the darkened limousine 3 miles away, watching the entire scene through the high-definition feed of a hidden pinhole camera. Their voices crackled through my tablet speakers. The fracture was deep, jagged, and exactly what they deserved. Watching their pathetic alliance crumble under the weight of their own greed felt better than the most expensive champagne. My phone rang. The caller ID showed the Thorne estate landline. I picked up, my voice flat and empty. Elena, you pathetic girl. Victoria Thorne's voice barked through the speaker. You left a pile of your cheap thrift store rags in the guest wing. Get over here right now and clear out your trash. I won't have the house smelling of poverty a second longer. If you aren't here in 20 minutes, I'm burning it all. I'll be there, Victoria, I said softly. Expect me soon. I arrived at the Thorne mansion 20 minutes later, but I didn't arrive alone. I was followed by a van of 6 men in crisp, black service uniforms. To anyone watching, they looked like a high-end cleaning crew. In reality, they were Ethelgard's elite security detail. I walked into the foyer, my head held high. Victoria was standing at the top of the stairs, a glass of gin in her hand, looking down at me with pure vitriol. Bianca was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She was wearing a limited edition silk gown from a designer boutique, a dress I had paid $5,000 for as a birthday gift she had never thanked me for. You're late, Victoria sneered. Go to the back. Use the servants' entrance. I ignored her and walked straight toward Bianca. I signaled to 2 of my men. That dress. Take it. It was purchased on an Ethelgard corporate account that has been flagged for unauthorized use. Since it was never technically gifted through a legal channel, it is now evidence of theft. Bianca jumped up, her face turning a bright, ugly red. What are you talking about? This is my dress. You can't touch me. You homeless bitch. Take it, I repeated, my voice like iron. How dare you, Victoria screamed, rushing down the stairs. I'll have you arrested. I'll call the bank and have you thrown into the street where you belong. She grabbed her phone and dialed the private banker she had bullied for years. She put it on speaker, wanting me to hear her order my destruction. This is Victoria Thorne, she snapped. I need a $100,000 wire transfer authorized immediately, and I want you to report a trespasser at my residence. There was a long, cold pause on the other end of the line. The banker's voice was professional, but there was an unmistakable edge of finality to it. Mrs. Thorne, I'm afraid I cannot do that. All Thorne family accounts, including the primary trust and your personal lines of credit, have been frozen by federal investigators. We are looking into several counts of corporate fraud and embezzlement. You currently have a $0 spending limit on everything. Victoria's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. 0. That's impossible. My son, he said. The front door slammed open. Julian marched in, looking like a man who had been running through a nightmare. He stopped dead when he saw me standing in the center of his hall, flanked by my guards, looking more powerful than he had ever seen me. Elena, he gasped, his eyes darting from the guards to the shattered glass on the floor. What are you doing here? How are you? Why are you dressed like that? He looked at my face, searching for the submissive, broken wife he had discarded. He found a stranger, a queen. What have you done? Julian grumbled, his voice cracking as he realized the world he had built on my back was sliding into the abyss. Did you do this? I walked up to him, stopping only an inch away. I could smell the sweat and the desperation on him. I leaned in, my voice a whisper that only he could hear, sharp as a razor. I told you once that you weren't worth the Thorne legacy, Julian, but the truth is, the Thorne legacy never existed. It was always mine. I'm just taking back what's mine, Julian, and I'm starting with the air you breathe. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a shimmering cage of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, filled with the elite of the city who smelled of old money and new scandals. I watched from the mezzanine as Julian and Lydia navigated the crowd, their forced smiles as brittle as dry glass. Julian was desperate, his eyes scanning the room for the ghost he knew as the chairman of Ethelgard. He thought this night would be his salvation, a chance to beg for a lifeline for his sinking company. As they reached the check-in desk to verify their seating, a ripple of quiet laughter followed them. My ears, sharpened by years of calculating risks, caught the frantic whispers. "I am sorry, Mr. Thorne," the receptionist said, her voice loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. "But your primary account has been flagged. The card was declined for the entry fee. Perhaps there is another card you would like to try." Julian's face turned a violent shade of purple. "That is impossible. Try it again. It is a platinum line with a $500,000 limit. I have tried 3 times, sir," the woman replied, her polite smile never wavering. Lydia shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around as she realized the high society lions were already circling. "I chose that exact moment to make my entrance." I descended the grand staircase in a custom-made black silk gown that clung to my silhouette, the fabric expertly draped to soften the slight curve of my stomach. I felt the weight of every camera lens in the room shifting toward me. I was no longer the mousy wife in scuffed heels. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. Victoria Thorne, draped in pearls that I knew were already being appraised by debt collectors, shoved her way through the photographers. She saw me and her face twisted into a mask of pure malice. "You," Victoria shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "How dare you show your face here, security? This woman is a common thief. She is a fraud who stole my son's credit cards to buy that dress. Arrest her." Immediately, the room went silent. Julian looked at me, his mouth hanging open, unable to process the vision of the woman he thought he had destroyed. Before the security guards could move, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the bidding, we have a very special announcement," the host said, his voice booming with forced excitement. "We would like to extend our deepest gratitude to our diamond sponsor for this evening, a woman whose record-breaking donation of $10 million has single-handedly funded our new children's wing. Please join me in welcoming the president of Ethelgard Vance Holdings, Elena Vance." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Julian looked as if the floor had turned into liquid beneath his feet. His eyes bulged, darting from the host to me, then back again. $10 million, Julian whispered, his voice a pathetic, wheezing sound. "No, that is not possible." "Elena." I walked past Victoria, her hand still frozen in mid-air from her accusation, and stepped onto the stage. I looked out over the sea of shocked faces, my gaze landing on Julian like a physical weight. "Success is often built on a foundation of trust," I said into the microphone, my voice cool and resonant. "But in the world of high finance, and in the world of the heart, honesty is the only currency that truly matters. Without it, your empire is just a house of cards, waiting for a light breeze to blow it all away." I held Julian's gaze for 5 long seconds, watching the realization of his utter ruin dawn on him. When I stepped down, Julian lunged toward the backstage area, tipping over a waiter in his haste. He cornered me near the velvet curtains, his eyes bloodshot. "Elena, please," he gasped, his chest heaving as if he were running out of air. "You have to listen to me. I was confused. The wine, the divorce, it was a mistake. My company, Zenith is dying. You are the only one who can save me. Please, Elena, for the sake of the 5 years we had." My lead security officer, a wall of a man, stepped between us, his hand firmly on Julian's shoulder. "The president is not taking appointments tonight. Mr. Thorne," the guard said. Julian was shoved back into the shadows, looking like a discarded toy. Nearby, I saw Lydia. She wasn't looking at Julian with love or concern. She was hunched over her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen as she accessed the private server Julian had foolishly shared with her. She was already downloading the records of his $5 million embezzlement, her eyes gleaming with the predatory instinct of a survivor who knew the ship was sinking. As I walked toward the exit, I brushed past a side table where Julian's briefcase sat. I leaned down as if to adjust my heel, and with a deliberate flick of my wrist, a thick blue folder slid out of my clutch and landed on top of his papers. It was labeled in bold, gold letters, Project Horizon, Restructure and Recovery. It was the bait, the fake project that would promise 100% return on investment. I knew Julian would find it. I knew he would see it as his last chance to stay out of prison. And I knew that the moment he poured his remaining capital into it, the trap would finally snap shut. The trap was set, and Julian Thorne, driven by a cocktail of greed and desperation, walked straight into the center of it. He believed Project Horizon was his secret backdoor into the Vance fortune, a way to reclaim the power he had lost. Within 48 hours of finding that blue folder, he had liquidated every last cent of his remaining offshore accounts, nearly $15 million, and wired it into a shell company that existed only as a digital ghost on my server. To him, it was an investment. To me, it was a funeral for his vanity. The domestic fallout began almost immediately. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Bianca was hauled away in handcuffs from a nightclub in the meatpacking district. The charge was possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. When she called Julian, hysterical and demanding he pay her $50,000 bond, he had to tell her the truth. He was tapped out. The Thorne name, once a golden ticket, couldn't even buy her a night in a private cell. Victoria was the next to break. I watched the security footage from a boutique jeweler on Madison Avenue as she placed her grandmother's diamond tiara and a set of Burmese rubies on the velvet counter. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely sign the appraisal papers. She walked away with $800,000, a pittance compared to the millions she had spent on her lifestyle. She had no idea that my assistant was waiting in the car outside to take those jewels directly to my private vault. They were Vance property now. But the final blow came from his own paranoia. I sent a single encrypted file to Julian's private email. It was a video of Lydia meeting with the head of a rival tech firm. In the footage, she was handing over a flash drive the very embezzlement records she had stolen from Julian's office. I knew Julian would snap. He was a man who built his world on control, and he was losing it all. He confronted Lydia in the lobby of their apartment. The hidden cameras I had installed weeks ago caught every second of the horror. Julian didn't just argue. He roared. He grabbed her by the shoulders and threw her against the marble wall, his fist connecting with her jaw in a blind, pathetic rage. You ungrateful bitch, Julian screamed, his voice breaking with a high-pitched, manic energy. I gave you everything, and you sell me out to the highest bidder after everything I did to get rid of Elena. After everything, I didn't hesitate. I released the unedited footage to every social media platform and news conglomerate in the country. By the time the sun came up, Julian Thorne was the most hated man in America. The golden boy of Zenith was now a documented abuser and a failing businessman. By 10 o'clock that morning, the board of directors had called for an emergency session to strip him of his title. The stock plummeted 60% in 3 hours. Julian didn't go to the board meeting. He came to me. He looked like a ghost of the man I had married. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were hollow pits of terror. He didn't even try to stand. He fell to his knees in the middle of my office, his forehead touching the carpet. "Elena, please, I am begging you," Julian sobbed, the sound wet and pathetic. "Save Zenith. I have no money left for the lawyers. Bianca is in jail. My mother is losing the house. Do it. Do it for the baby. For the sake of the child in your womb. Our child. Please, do not let us starve." I was just scared. I didn't mean to. I stood up from my desk, walking slowly toward him until my shadow covered his trembling frame. I felt no pity, only a cold, clinical disgust. I leaned down, my voice a whisper that felt like a winter wind. "The child. You dare to speak of this child." "Julian," I asked, my voice trembling with a fury I had suppressed for years. "The child you tried to erase with a bottle of poisoned wine. The child you told your doctor had to truly disappear so you could keep your precious funds. Did you think I was that blind? Did you think I wouldn't hear your voice on those recordings, planning our murder?" Julian looked up, his face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Elena, I can explain. Please, there is nothing left to explain." "Julian," I said, turning my back on him, "you aren't a man. You are just a risk that has finally been mitigated." The realization that I had been a step ahead from the very first drop of wine seemed to shatter what was left of his composure. His eyes bulged, and his breath came in short, ragged hitches. "You knew," he choked out, his voice cracking like dry wood. "The entire time. You let me play the fool. I didn't let you do anything. Julian, you chose to be a murderer. I simply chose to survive you." His face contorted into something subhuman. With a guttural scream, he lunged across the desk, his fingers clawing for my throat. Before he could even graze the fabric of my blazer, a shadow moved from the corner of the room. Elias was a blur of efficiency. He caught Julian mid-air, twisted his arm with a sickening pop, and pinned him to the floor. Julian groaned, his face pressed against the expensive carpet he had once coveted. "Get him out of my sight," I commanded. Elias dragged him toward the door like a sack of refuse. Julian's parting words were a desperate, incoherent mumble of threats and pleas. As the door slammed shut, the silence that followed was broken by a soft knock. It was Victoria. She didn't march in this time. She shuffled, her shoulders slumped, her once perfect hair escaping its pins. She looked 20 years older than she had just 3 days ago. "Elena," she whispered, her voice trembling, I came to talk. Julian he is not himself. We are a family. Please, for the sake of the Thorne name, show some mercy." I looked at her, seeing only the woman who had ripped my mother's locket from my neck. "You want mercy. Victoria, you will get exactly what you gave. Follow me." I drove her to the cemetery on the edge of the city, a place of gray stone and weeping willows. We stood before a modest headstone. My mother's name was etched there, simple and clean. The wind was biting, tearing at Victoria's thin silk scarf. "On your knees," I said. "What?" she gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "You called her a nobody. You called me an orphan whose blood was thin. Kneel in the dirt and apologize to her. If you don't, I will ensure that the foreclosure on your house happens by 6 o'clock tonight instead of next week. Victoria Thorne, the queen of the social register, collapsed into the mud." She wept, her forehead touching the cold grass. I am sorry. Please, forgive me." When she finally stood up, Shaking and humiliated, I handed her a single sheet of paper. It was a formal invoice. This is the total cost of your lifestyle for the last 5 years. Every designer bag, every trip to the Maldives, every drop of gin you drank on my dime. It totals $4,700,000. Since you signed the divorce waiver as a witness, you are now personally liable for the Thorne family's corporate debts. I expect payment by the 1st of next month. I left her standing there in the rain, a broken relic of a dead dynasty. But Julian wasn't finished. My security team alerted me that he had broken into the old server room at Zenith, using an old administrative password he thought I hadn't changed. He was attempting to download the proprietary algorithms for Ethelgard's high-frequency trading platform. He planned to sell them to the highest bidder on the dark web to fund his escape. He had no idea it was a honeypot. Every file he touched was a digital trap, laden with trackers and evidence of industrial espionage. He was digging his own prison cell with every click of a mouse. That evening, Brody, the man Julian called his brother-in-arms, sat in my office. He looked terrified. He slid a voice recorder across the desk. "Julian is losing it, Elena," Brody said, his voice barely audible. He told me that if the wine didn't work, if you didn't leave, I was supposed to cut the brake lines on your car. He wanted it to look like a high-speed accident on the bridge. I couldn't do it. I have a daughter. I can't go to prison for murder. I pressed play. I heard Julian's voice, cold and frantic. Just make sure she's going fast. Brody, one sharp turn and she's over the rail. It's the only way to be sure. Just do it. I turned off the device. The room felt very cold. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling a tiny, rhythmic flutter. A kick. My baby was alive, and his father had tried to crush us beneath a ton of steel. You did the right thing, Brody, I said, my eyes fixed on the city lights below. Go to the police. Give them everything. I'll make sure your family is taken care of. I was done with the games. It was time for the final execution. The board meeting was tomorrow, and I was going to be the one to lower the casket. The silence of the 60th floor was heavy, a thick blanket of anticipation that pressed against my skin. It was 2:00 in the morning on the night before the final shareholder meeting. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk, the vibration sounding like a rattlesnake in the empty office. It was a message from an unknown number, but the venom was unmistakably Julian's. I am at your door. You took my life. Elena, now I am taking yours. It ends tonight. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I had spent 5 years hiding in plain sight, and I was finished with shadows. I looked at Elias, who stood by the door, and the 3 undercover officers stationed behind the reinforced glass of the executive lounge. My office had been transformed into a killing jar, a high-tech stage where every movement was recorded by 16 hidden cameras. The heavy oak doors to my office groaned as they were forced open. Julian stumbled in, his clothes torn and his eyes reflecting a terrifying, shattered psyche. He wasn't the polished CEO anymore. He was a cornered animal. In his right hand, he gripped a heavy black handgun, the metal gleaming under the recessed lighting. His hand was shaking so violently I could hear the rattle of the slide. You think you're so smart," Julian roared, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, hysterical edge. You stole my company. You turned my mother against me. You ruined everything." He raised the weapon, pointing it directly at my chest. I didn't flinch. I stood behind my desk, my hands resting flat on the surface. "I didn't ruin you, Julian," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling calmness. "You were ruined the moment you decided that my life and our child's life were worth less than a stock option." "I'll kill you," he screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. I'll end it all right here. If I can't have Zenith, if I can't have the money, then no one will. You're going to die, Elena." "Look at the screen behind me." "Julian," I replied, gesturing toward the massive television mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life. showing a live news feed. A news anchor was speaking over a graphic that displayed Julian's mugshot and a list of charges: attempted murder, industrial espionage, and embezzlement. A ticker tape at the bottom read, "Arrest warrant approved for Julian Thorne. Police units currently moving to intercept." "It is already over," I told him. "The whole world is watching you right now." "No," he shrieked, his face twisting in a mask of pure desperation. I won't go to prison. I'll kill you first." He pulled the trigger. The sound of the firing pin hitting the primer was a dull, hollow click. He pulled it again. Click, click. He stared at the weapon in confusion, his breathing coming in frantic. Shallow gasps. It's a lie. Why won't it? He didn't know that Brody had visited my office 4 hours ago, handing over the magazine from Julian's weapon. The live rounds had been replaced with blanks, and the firing pin had been subtly filed down. "Drop the weapon," Elias commanded as he and the police officers swarmed the room. They tackled Julian to the floor, the metal of the gun clattering against the marble. He fought like a madman, his screams echoing through the vents, until the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. As they hauled him to his feet, the elevator doors opened once more. Lydia stepped out. She wasn't wearing her usual designer heels. She was in a simple coat, her face pale but determined. She walked straight to the lead detective and handed him a heavy briefcase full of Julian's private ledgers. Julian froze, his eyes locking onto hers. "Lydia, you're with—" Her Lydia didn't look away. Her voice was steady, though her hands were balled into fists. You hit me, Julian. You tried to kill your own wife and child. I am not going to jail for you. I told them everything, the wine, the accidents, all of it." Julian let out a broken, animalistic sob as the officers began to drag him toward the elevator. He looked back at me one last time, his face a pathetic ruin of a man. I stood there, my silhouette framed by the city lights 60 floors above the ground. I was no longer the victim of the Thorne family. I was the law. I was the architect of their destruction. "Take him away," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The doors closed, and the silence returned. I turned back to the window, the cold glass reflecting the face of a woman who had finally reclaimed her soul. Tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock, the shareholders of Zenith would meet, and I would be there to ensure that the Thorne name was erased from the skyline forever. The air in the Zenith conference room was thick with the scent of a funeral. Outside, the news cycle had been a relentless storm, and inside, the stock tickers showed a collapse of 99%. The company was a hollowed-out shell, and the investors sitting at the long mahogany table looked like they were waiting for the executioner. In the very front row, Victoria and Bianca Thorne sat with their spines unnervingly stiff. Despite being bankrupt, Victoria had draped herself in a fur coat she no longer owned, her chin tilted up in a final desperate act of defiance. Bianca stared at the floor, her face pale and drawn, but she still wore the arrogant sneer of someone who believed the world owed her a throne. The lead counsel for the board stood up, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "The emergency meeting will now come to order. We are here to witness the transfer of all remaining assets to our primary creditor and majority shareholder. This individual now controls 92% of the Zenith Group." Victoria scoffed, her voice a shrill rasp. "Whoever this person is, they are late. The Thornes do not wait for anyone. The chairman is here," the lawyer replied, stepping aside. The double doors swung open. I walked into the room, my heels clicking against the marble with the rhythm of a ticking clock. I was dressed in a navy Vance silk suit, my hair pulled back into a sharp, lethal blade. The gasps that rippled through the room were like a sudden gust of wind. Victoria's face went from pale to a sickly, translucent white. She tried to stand, her hands clawing at the table. No, This is a joke, Elena. You are a nothing. You are a beggar. We threw into the street. Sit down, Victoria, I said, my voice cool and absolute. I took my place at the head of the table, Julian's seat. I am not the woman you threw out. I am the woman who bought the street, the house, and every debt you have ever signed your name to. I am the president of Ethelgard Vance Holdings. Victoria's eyes rolled back into her head. She let out a soft, choking sound before collapsing into her seat, slipping onto the floor in a heap of faux luxury fur. She had fainted at the mere sight of the truth. Bianca was frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I opened my leather portfolio and slid a stack of documents across the table. These are the records for Project Horizon. It was a shell corporation I created to absorb the $15 million Julian embezzled. Along with these, I have the evidence of the shadow loans and the industrial espionage committed by the Thorne family. Under the terms of the emergency restructuring, I am requesting the immediate seizure of all personal Thorne assets, the mansion, the cars, the jewelry, and the trust funds to compensate the shareholders. At that moment, the side door opened. 2 police officers led Julian into the room. He was in a bright orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed to a belly chain. He looked like a broken man, his eyes bloodshot and wandering. He stopped when he saw me sitting in his chair, wielding his empire like a sword. "Elena, please," Julian whimpered, the sound wet and pathetic as he struggled to breathe. You can't do this. We were family." I stood up and walked toward him, stopping just inches from his face. I didn't see the man I had once loved. I saw a parasite. "Family?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper but sharp enough to draw blood. "You said I wasn't worthy of the Thorne name, Julian. You said I was a parasite who deserved to die for your legacy." I turned to the board of directors, my voice rising so it filled every corner of the room. He spoke of worthiness, but the reality is that the Thorne family isn't even fit to shine the shoes of the Vance family. You built a kingdom on lies, and today, the truth has burned it down. I looked at the clerk. Effective immediately. The Zenith Group is dissolved. This building will be renamed Vance Tower. And as for the Thorne family, they have 1 hour to vacate the apartments they are currently occupying illegally. If they are not out, their belongings will be burned as refuse. Julian was dragged away, his screams of Elena fading as the heavy doors closed. I watched as security guards lifted Victoria from the floor to escort her and Bianca out of the building and into the cold, harsh light of a world that no longer cared if they existed. I walked out of the boardroom and onto the private balcony. The morning sun was rising over the city, golden and bright, warming my face. For the first time in 5 years, the air felt clean. I placed my hand over my stomach, feeling the tiny, strong heartbeat of the only legacy that mattered. "It is finally over, my love," I whispered, a single tear of relief escaping my eye. "They can never hurt us again. We are finally free. Thank you so much for listening to this journey of betrayal and justice. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from today? Please leave a comment below so we can connect and share our thoughts on Elena's ultimate revenge. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button. Your support helps ensure that stories of strength and justice like this one reach even more people. Thank you for being part of our community.